So I'm really excited about our space. I think it's going to develop and evolve very quickly this year, especially in light of the liquidity crisis. I think movement of the whole blockchain space toward DeFi and toward DAOs and toward um, basically compliance solutions is very good for us. They're quite really interesting trends out there.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Engatica Interview Series. I'm your host Anshdeep Kaur, and we're really glad to have you join us today. Today we have Yair Tamar, CEO and co-founder of Solid Block on the show. Welcome, Yair.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So before we move ahead, let me brief you a bit about the Engatica Interview Series. So the Engatica Interview Series is a powerhouse of insights from industry experts and influencers from around the world, a platform that provides latest news on AI, automation, and technologies that will help you grow your business. Come be a part of our community, learn, share, and grow with us. So, Yael, I have a few questions for you. So, could you walk us through the involvement in the largest IPO of Israeli real estate company on AIM and your executive role as the largest MVNO in Israel listed on NASDAQ?
Sure. So those are kind of interesting journeys in my career. So I started as a business analyst from a broker dealer to M&A companies. That was basically my job was to analyze different aspects of the business, whether it's financial, economic, whether it's due diligence, meaning former performance basically up to that date, or future looking pro forma type of analysis. And sometimes it was for basically mergers and acquisitions and evaluation of a potential company to be acquired. And in other cases, like the IPO, it was basically preparing a prospectus, right? So preparing information for a prospectus for a public offering. And that was back in 2007. And that was probably the most successful year, at least of that decade, in terms of IPOs in various public markets. A lot of Israeli companies exit on the British market, right? So some exit in NASDAQ, some exit in the British market. And specifically, this IPO was not a high-tech IPO, which is what kind of is expected from a lot of Israeli companies. The local real estate company called the Fishman Group, which is mainly commercial mainly commercial real estate group, running a lot of, at that point, I think was mainly DIY centers, do-it-yourself centers called Home Center, and other other commercial assets as well. So at that point, real estate in Eastern Europe, following kind of the collapse, the collapse of a lot of those, Soviet Union countries, and then, but then very high growth in the early 2000s. Real estate was growing at a very, very rapid pace and value in Ukraine, Russia, and a lot of satellite countries. And so the idea was to raise funding to buy assets in Russia by the Fishman Group to basically open DIY stores. And actually that industry itself was then very, very popular, became very popular industry. Just like in most emerging economies, kind of these industries that we take for granted in the Western world, right? So my job was to analyze and to write most of the prospectus. I started working at a smaller M&A boutique on that project. And then while I was working there, basically Ernst & Young offered me a job, and I decided I needed more background in corporate finance and audits and due diligence from the financial point of view. And looking back at it, it was a good decision because I did get a lot of exposure to to understanding corporate finance. Like I can look at, at corporate statements and understand what I see. So basically, that IPO was very interesting because it was very, very successful. It was not a high tech company. It was basically back then REITs, real estate investment trusts were not that popular, right? So especially public REITs, and so it was very interesting as kind of this first use case where you had a lot of people just, especially in the UK, invest in an Israeli real estate group that also operated these do-it-yourself centers in Russia, right? So that's kind of, I think it's a really interesting use case, and they raised, I think, $130 million. As a part of this prospectus, the group already identified a lot of centers that it wanted to buy. Of course, it did all the real estate valuations and business plans. And, we at Ernst & Young basically facilitated a lot of this like pro forma and analysis of the same assets for the previous years that were going to be acquired, right? And some of them were kind of the Russian brand of DIY centers and stuff like that. And I learned a lot about real estate from that project alone, like what it means to have an anchor tenant, occupancy, management, asset management, the aspects of it, ways to also manage risks, right? So on the level of real estate, what kind of risks that's a big part of the prospectus, of course, is to be able to create different scenarios. Like, what if the economy is not doing so well? What if the stores are not bringing as much revenue, and and what is the optimal allocation of different shops within the shopping mall? Like, it was super, super interesting, and I still to this day, like, because I wrote a lot of the prospectus, I can probably kind of even go back and remember which cities there were, the sizes. Like, that was in 2007. So, and the second part is the MVNO, which is a mobile virtual network operator. And that was also a super new industry back then. That was maybe 2010, 11. And at that point in Israel, we had like only a couple of mobile carriers monopolizing the market, and no regulation to offer additional carriers. So that's when this new technology came out called MVNO, which basically allows to run a different network on top of an existing infrastructure. And so it was fairly new, and I was working for a financial group which invested in a lot of different businesses, one of which was telecom. And so we basically ran this mobile virtual network operator. If I'm not mistaken, it might have even been the same group that ran these DIY centers incidentally, even though that was really not really, it was not related to different companies. And so I basically was responsible for all of the communications of the group. And while I was there, actually we decided to do a reverse merger, which was back then kind of the precursor of the SPAC. It's a different instrument. So we basically bought an empty shell on NASDAQ, I believe, pink sheets, OTC, and then we basically put the business there. So that was an outlet for raising funding in order to develop the network, to marketing, and so on and so forth. And yeah, the same network, I believe it still exists in Israel. It just is owned by a different company. So yeah, so that's how I became basically an executive and in communications of a public company, so to speak, through this reverse merger. So it was also a very interesting experience because, again, not even the communications part, because by then I've been doing that for some time, although being able to issue press releases and things like that will influence the market and let the public company raise more money. But it was more interesting for me to actually, learn and work on the transaction itself, where it was, where the empty shell was acquired, and then kind of just learning that there's different ways of going public and not just have an IPO.
Nice. So you have co-founded several fintech startups, like a successful marketing company in the blockchain space and an import-export company that was acquired, right? So what motivated you to venture into different areas, and what lessons have you learned from this entrepreneurial journey?
So I think it was my journey as an entrepreneur, kind of trying on different risk levels because, I was always looking for a way to be independent and create a good team that will support different activities that are versatile. So I started this import export because I had a passion for nutritional supplements, nutrition, and so on that I turned into kind of creating products of our own and packaging them. And I found a team in India to work with me on creation of the product, but also on some marketing aspects and so on. And I think it was just also kind of popular. Like there was this drop shipping trend running at that time. So I basically jumped on the trend and it was quite successful. And I ended up selling it to a family member and his partner. And it's running to this day pretty successfully around Israel and abroad. And so that trend basically has passed and I kind of grew out of it and I had different interests at the time and I always want to learn something new. And so I was working as a director of marketing at an education company. And when I realized I wanted to be independent and work more on other areas, especially as I grew into this blockchain and crypto space. And so I said, okay, I can do what I'm doing now, but I can do this for a number of companies and replicate the type of service that is right now needed in the market, which was fundraising for ICOs, initial coin offerings. And so I went out to be an independent, basically marketing freelancer, grew the company, grew the team, eventually to, I think, over 10 people. And if we count all the freelancers, over 20 people. And we were working pretty strenuously because the market was booming and we had a lot of clients and we ended up being quite successful. So I think that, marketing is a really good area to have sustainable business. But the problem with that is that it's not passive income. You always have to be working because people are interested specifically in your skills, my skills, right? I had a good, capable team, but to craft the strategy and to understand how to penetrate the market, to understand and fine tune the messages that will speak to people, it was up to me. So I generally realized that, that was basically working on many, many projects that were not my projects. I was passionate about it and good at it, but I wanted to have my business with one vision, which is helpful to the world and is paving the way for a better future, which is what I believe about Solid Block.
Right. So as a regional co-chair at Fibreed, how do you see blockchain technology impacting the real estate industry? And what are some of the opportunities and challenges that it presents?
So real estate investing is really booming on the crowdfunding side. Thank God there are now opportunities for almost anyone to really, fractionally invest in a project, either in their country or abroad. So that has opened up a lot of doors. At the same time, there's still, so that has been resolved, right? So if people didn't have access to invest in real estate, I think now the access is abundant. But on the other hand, right now, as we can see in the market, there's a huge and dire need for liquidity. And so that need is much harder to resolve. I believe that we cracked the code with Solid Block, where we can basically offer a variety of financing sources that are more global, that are more driven by individual investors and also by the secondary market. So the reason why corporations, or companies or REITs, they go public on a public market, it's because then they have access to kind of audience and capital and so on and so forth. But it's not a path for everyone, right? Not every asset owner can do that. At the same time, in many countries, you don't have access to bank financing, and now even in those that do, it's very, very expensive. And so we offer the best between two worlds, right? For an asset owner to be able to use blockchain to essentially secure a financial instrument. So it's secured by the real estate or by assets, right? Blockchain is the instrument that facilitates security issuance in a much more simplified and cheaper way than going public. And also does not require extensive reporting like going public. At the same time, now the product is much more available to investors, right? So I believe that that's the key to liquidity. One of the keys, the beginning of solution for liquidity. And the second layer of the solution is, again, using blockchain to distribute these securities, to create a network, an affiliate network of brokers and syndicators and people that resell, securities that are backed by assets. And that's our newest mission. That's what we are on to today.
Right, that's interesting. So you have a full course on tokenization. Could you give us a brief overview of what tokenization is and why is it becoming a popular method of fundraising and investment?
So tokenization, I would say, before even talking about, let's say, methodology for fundraising, it's very simply securitization, which is using blockchain for records. And that's all it is. So securitization is basically a methodology of issuing a financial instrument to raise money for a company or a business or an asset. So when you raise capital from a large number of investors, in most countries is over 35, then you are required to create a financial instrument and some sort of an offering memorandum and so on and so forth. And this is not something that we've invented. It's exists in the world for several hundred years or maybe even longer. And so when this happens, when you release a security, there is, of course, a way to do this on a public market. And as I mentioned, it's expensive. If you are releasing a private security, then you usually need to use expensive entities, sort of transfer agents and brokers and so on and so forth, underwriters, to actually secure this security and to create, to collateralize, I would say, the asset, and then enable someone to buy it. By the way, when someone buys a security, it gives them various rights, such as rights to dividends, right? Or to proceeds from increasing the value of the asset, right? So maybe they can sell this security, maybe they cannot. In most cases in real estate, you cannot sell the security and you just sit there and wait until the exit. With tokenization, however, because it is secured on the blockchain, it's quite easy to plug this in to some sort of an exchange, like a wallet to wallet over the counter, or there are also these second-tier exchanges that are licensed to trade securities. And so with blockchain, it simplifies and streamlines everything. So that's what tokenization is about. It's simply placing these securities instead of within some sort of expensive regulatory frameworks that you have to do, into compliant blockchain frameworks. And that's why it's so revolutionary. And that's why almost every large investment bank, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and so on, Goldman Sachs, they all have issued securities on the blockchain already, at least the proof of concept. And some of them are even releasing their own tokenization platforms.
That's interesting. So can you tell us more about your podcast, Block Solid, and what topics do you typically cover?
Block Solid is about real estate and blockchain. And so we cover the need for solutions within the real estate market within the real estate technology world, what's missing out there, which problems and challenges are there, and how we can solve them with blockchain or maybe other solutions. We cover topics like buying real estate with cryptocurrencies. We cover topics like what's needed in the infrastructure sense from tokenization platforms, for example. And we covered things like the needs of real estate agents within that realm. So it's a variety of topics that surround real estate and blockchain. I've had some podcasts where we talk less about real estate and more about the blockchain space and how it's evolving, because it influences real estate within the blockchain and tokenization. But yeah, I'm encouraging everybody to check it out. And there's some really, really interesting interviews there, like Tim Draper, for example, was on it, and quite a few really, really good and really impressive people.
Hey, that's impressive. So are there any other soundbites you'd like to share with our audience?
So I'm really excited about our space. I think it's going to develop and evolve very quickly this year, especially in light of the liquidity crisis. I think movement of the whole blockchain space toward DeFi and toward DAOs and toward basically compliance solutions is very good for us. There are quite really interesting trends out there, specifically with respect to compliance and the requirements now placed on banks, right? After all the bank failures out there, and requirements placed on investment banks and so on that present challenges, but also opportunities. So I'm really excited about where this space is going to go.
Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us. For more content, subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to access exclusive content from thought leaders from around the globe. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you with the new experts soon.
Thank you.